So here is our stick. It's about as long as the arm is, which is going to be a length conducive for us to be able to flip it underneath the arm. Noting that if you have a longer type of stick, it's going to be harder to do certain things because it's going to basically hit you in the ribs when you try to rotate it in certain directions. So we have, like, say, a bow staff, for example, where we have to handle quite differently than a smaller stick such as this. A small stick such as this can also be flipped around similar to what can be done with, say, like a juggling pin, although the way we do that will have to be a little bit different because the weight of a stick, of course, is going to be within the middle of it rather than a juggling pin that has a little bit off center of the weight. So if we're then going to hold our stick then right in the middle of the stick, that's going to be the focal point. That's the middle point. If we were to spin the stick around like a top on a surface, it would spin around that middle point, that focal point, because there's even weight on either side. Noting that that's different than, say, a juggling pin, which is weighted really well for rotating, strangely enough, with that odd type of shape, but it's not going to be right in the middle of the focal point. It's going to be more towards the handle. That means that as we handle it, if we grab it more close to the handle, like a 3/4 type of grab, meaning you've got 2/3 of the stick up top, 1/3 of the stick down below, the top part is going to be a little bit heavier. That means when we rotate it around, we're going to have more weight on the top part of the stick, noting that as we rotate a stick like this, we want it to be somewhat light, but have enough weight to it so that we can feel the focal point. If you look at if you just use like a piece of plastic, it's going to be too light. You won't be able to do anything with it because it's not going to have that center point because there's not really enough weight for it to gravitate around that center or focal point. So here we're just doing an exercise to get our wrist and forearm worked out. This exercise in and of itself can really, get your body going a little bit, kind of loosen you up. So it's great for the forearms, and you can also kind of get in a little bit of a groove because it'll swing your entire body around with the weight of the stick. And of course, we would like to do that on both hands here. So we're just going to rotate it around, get a feel for the stick and the weight of it, and just get a little loose, get a little warmed up. So now note also that I've put some tape on one side of the stick, remembering that it's just a stick. So there's no real handle versus the end point of the stick. But sometimes when people practice with a stick like this, they might imagine that it's going to be like a sword, it's a practice sword, or you could imagine that it's going to have a point on one end or something like that. But even if you're not doing that, it's useful to tag one side so you know one side from the other, so that when you're flipping it around, you can see, did it rotate a full 180 degrees, a whole 360 degrees, or simply a half turn of a 180 degrees. So I put tape just on one end of the stick to give me some reference point as we mess around with it. Now I'm going to put my hand about on that 3/4 type of position. So again, 2/3 up above, 1/3 down below to start off with this next bit here. So that's going to be the grab, and it's kind of like a baseball stance here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it. Notice my wrist is going around and I'm flipping it under my arm. What we're going to ultimately get to is a kind of side to side motion, which is a great little groove. It's pretty easy to do once you get used to it. And it seems like just that little movement would be just one movement, but you can really move around differently just with that little groove, right? Because we can adjust how much we're going to be rotating from one side to the other. So we're going to start doing it first without having any kind of rotation with the thumb, which we'll do, and then we'll add this kind of little flippy rotation with the thumb afterwards. So this is the more simple kind of movement, just to be moving from side to side, just to get our blood working with it. So now I'm going to put my other hand on top of it. So I put this one under my armpit here. I'm actually going to kind of hit the underside of my armpit and then grab basically right on top of where my other hand is. Therefore, when I pull down with this arm, I'm still going to have basically a 3/4 grip, right? I'm still going to have basically 1/3 of the stick on the bottom and 2/3 of it up top. So then we're going to pull it down. So notice I'm going to count it down this way. Now you can kind of count this in timing of 4 beats, right? So I'm going to put it under my armpit and then grab it, and then I'm going to go down, and then I'm going to put it back on my shoulder under my armpit and then grab it and then down. Or you can eliminate the grab and think of it as like a 3-beat type of thing if you want to put a timing to it, right? I'm going to put it on my shoulder, put it under my armpit, and then grab it down. Put it on my shoulder, under my armpit, and then grab it and pull it down, right? So let's just see how that works. It's on my shoulder, and then I put it under my armpit, and then I grab it, and then we pull it down on my shoulder. Notice as I put it on my shoulder here, I'm kind of rotating my whole body. You can practice in terms of the rhythm of it, on how much you want to be moving from side to side. You can actually turn a full 180 degrees one way and then the other way. That's why just this simple motion, there's a lot of different variants that you can get into that really can kind of loosen up the body a bit. Notice when I put it on my shoulder here, I'm not really putting it on the top of my shoulder, although I could up here, but I don't want to hit my bone. There's a bone right here, right on the top right there, and there's a bone sticking out on my shoulder here. I want to make sure that I'm hitting the meat of my shoulder. Now this stick is more of a reed. It's not like a hardwood, but you could do this with a hardwood as well. And again, if you're hitting yourself in the bone, that's going to hurt. You want to just tap the meat of your shoulder right there, and that'll feel like a nice tap, right? And then I'm going to rotate it underneath, and then we're grabbing it, and then we're pulling it down to the other side, down this way. Once again, I'm going to put this back on my shoulder like this. So now it's on the meat of my shoulder. We're going to put it underneath. So now it's on the meat under my arm. Then I'm going to grab it right here in the same 3/4, grab, and then pull it down this way. So now we have it down here. And then once again, I'm going to put it back on my shoulder, and then underneath, grab it, and then pull it down, boom. So that's going to be the general process. And once we have that pretty simple little groove back and forwards, then you can put some rhythm in it. You can put some music to it, and you can do it, and you can basically do that with any kind of simple music beat, and you can vary how far you're turning from one side to the other. Notice the footwork. I'm sliding on the balls of my feet. So that now notice I'm doing it faster here. And what I'm doing now is when I pull down, let's see, it hits the shoulder. And when I pull it down this way, I'm actually hitting it kind of on the wrist as well when I do it this way, which gives me another little bump of rhythm sometimes. Sometimes I do that when you start doing it faster like this. And so you can then you just kind of get in the groove of that. That's a fun, again, little exercise you can do in front of the TV or whatnot. And it doesn't involve too much flipping around, except that last bit was a little bit flippy, but that was something different. So now I'm going to grab it again. I'm going to add another bit into it. And that bit is going to be rotating it around the thumb. So now see what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it around the thumb here like that. Boom. And so the way to do that is really to kind of keep your hand open so that we have our thumb on it. Just this pivot around the thumb. So I want these 3 fingers I can have basically open, and I want to have that kind of loose. If you're holding onto it too tight, then you have no mobility. If it's too loose, you're going to drop it, of course. So you have to have something in the middle is going to be the ultimate grip. Then we'll want to do the other side. So once again, notice I'm just kind of grabbing it with my thumb. As I rotate around, I almost have to have my hand completely, almost totally open so that I can rotate it around that pivot point in my thumb. So that's where we want it. So then I can flip it around like that, and we'll add that into our routine. So there we have it. And now notice I'm kind of stopping here. So if you rotate one time and then you stop right there, you get the snap. You can kind of feel like the snap in your wrist. So that's kind of a fun little variant to do, just to feel the snap right there. Just to feel the flow of it. And then, so now I'm going to add that as my routine. So we flip it around the thumb and then put it under the arm and grab it down this way. I'm grabbing it back here again, but then I'm going to flip it around before I put it back under my armpit. So we're just adding a little thumb roll. We're not really flipping it. We're just rolling it, rotating it around the thumb. Then I'm going to grab it, same 3/4, pull it down, and then we put it back on the shoulder. And then before I put it back under the armpit, we do that little rotation and then under the armpit. So one more thing that has been added. Now note that we're just doing one rotation now. Once we do that little rotation, we can of course then vary the number of rotations. I could rotate it on between my thumb 2 times or 3 times or 4 times or whatever we want to do before going back to the normal routine under the armpit, pulling it down, back to the shoulder, rotate under the armpit, pulling it down, back to the shoulder, rotate, under the armpit, pulling it down, back to the shoulder, and then rotate to under the armpit, and so on. So then we can kind of get into the groove of just adding that added little detail. And again, that really kind of gets the blood going, and then you can get your rhythm into it, going a little faster here. Starting to get, you want to be on the balls of the feet. And so that means that we can also kind of move our body according to the steps of it as well, kind of getting in the flow. Now notice I can move more from one side to the other. I can actually point my body shoulder-wise. You can see I'm starting to put my shoulder more over here. Now I'm rotating it more each time. So now I'm rotating it with the thumb, whatever, 3 or 4 times, right? Before going back under. So we rotate it and then it goes back under. So it's just the same thing. Noting that once we add that little variant, if we start to think, oh, okay, now I can do the same thing, but I can combine that with, do I want to rotate and completely face this way? And then when I rotate the other way, I completely face the other way versus staying forward, facing forward, versus how much kind of rhythm do I want to put on the balls of my feet as I'm rolling back and forth, and varying the number of flips from 1 to 2 to 3 to whatever I feel like. Just those variants, we almost have like an infinite number of variants that you can do. So you don't really get bored doing the same thing. The point is that we can kind of, it's kind of like when people play drums and you see them just kind of and they play drums and then they just change the beat all of a sudden, but it all works together. And then they're doing the same thing, but then they kind of change the rhythm. It's the same kind of thing here, right? We just have a couple things that we're shuffling around between, but if you vary the intervals, the speed, and the number of rotations, the number of variants that you can do just with those few intervals becomes basically infinite, right? So you can do that for like hours in front of like the TV or listening to music or whatever, or an audio book, I find, and it's just fun. It becomes almost like you just do it automatically. You can listen to a book and do it, right? As you're kind of just moving. Now I'm picking up my foot, right? So now as I go from one side to the other side, I'm picking up my foot to try to get, again, a little bit more rhythm, almost a dance rhythm in it. Now, obviously, if you were to think about this from a martial arts standpoint, if you pick up your foot, you might get more force if I was to actually do strikes and whatnot. But I'm not really thinking about strikes or anything right here. I'm just getting the flow of the stick, getting a good feel for the stick, right? Also, just realize that when we're putting our foot up, now see how far I'm twisting now? I'm actually facing all the way this way versus all the way that way. I have my feet completely orientated, so that's going to be on the balls of my feet, going one way versus the other way. Just remember, also just note that if you're picking your feet up and your knees up, you will sometimes hit your knee with the stick when you're learning. That's part of the process. We have to know where the stick is. So if I'm moving around my house or something like that and I hit something, that's because I'm not aware of how I'm flipping the stick. And I will hit myself sometimes in the head even, or in the knee sometimes. That's why it's great to have a stick which is like rattan right here, which is kind of like a reed, something like bamboo, because it doesn't hurt that much if it's something like that. Although if you were to hit someone with it, it hurts because you're going to follow through, and it's like a whipping motion more than like a hard stick. It's still kind of a hard stick, but it's got some give to it. But it would definitely hurt if you if you hit someone and followed through with it. But it's a different kind of action than like if it was a bigger stick of like redwood or something. So again, you could get a stick that's bigger of redwood, but you'd like something that's fairly thin but not too light. And if it's a heavier wood and you hit yourself with it as it's rotating pretty fast, then that's going to hurt. If it's too light, you won't be able to rotate it, and you'll get frustrated because you can't rotate it because it has no center point because the stick's too light. So now I'm just kind of going back and forth. And again, you can get a good, see now I'm rotating more, and then I lost it. Okay. Well, so you sometimes it'll flat out your hands too.